Colonel Terry Virts, thank you so much, and welcome to Ion Politics.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
You bet. So you are running in the Democratic primary for U.S. Senate. In fact, you were the first to jump into the Democratic primary. Why are you running, and what is the essence of your campaign?
Well, I've been watching the country for the last few years, very frustrated with what's going on, really frustrated with both parties. And I came to the decision that I can't just sit around and doom scroll on Twitter and complain to my friends. It was time for me to do something. I was a F-16 fighter pilot in the Air Force. I was a NASA astronaut, and I feel like I've been given a lot. To those whom much has been given, much will be expected. So I looked at, where I could make the most impact, where I could do the most good. And to me, it was running as a Democrat here in Texas for the Senate, because it looks like for John Cornyn's seat, but it looks like Ken Paxton's going to be the nominee, corrupt Ken Paxton.
And so let me ask you before we get into all that, it's difficult to run for any candidate to run statewide, but even more so for Democrats in Texas who haven't won in 3 decades. So how are you going to break through?
It's absolutely been a long time. I think your show's been running for 22 years. Is that right? So when your show came on, it was already 9 years since a Democrat had won in Texas. Ann Richards was governor. Pearl Jam was at the top of the chart. So what we need to do is not do the same thing over, hoping for a different result. And we had Colin Allred, who ran the last time. He just recently announced that he's going to run again. Good man. I love Colin. I supported him. I voted for him. I wish he was our senator, but he's not. And Texas has for the last century, if you lose a Senate race, you don't win again. And if the Democrats try and do the same thing again, I don't think we're going to win. Texans just don't vote for a traditional Democratic politician, which is why I'm doing it. That's not what I am. I'm a fighter pilot, NASA astronaut, not that, which doesn't make me special. It makes me thankful for the opportunities I had in public school. But my worldview is to solve problems and not just be on, the D side fighting against ours, or the typical politician. And I think that's what Texans want. Somebody who's going to fight for Texans and not for their DC party, you know, in Washington.
So let me ask you about all that because, what do you think your the fact that your military service and the fact that you are a retired astronaut, what do those experiences mean for you now running for U.S. Senate? And why do you think that Democratic primary voters should vote for you over Colin Allred, who you mentioned obviously is now in this race, and then the other Democrats who may get in, former Congressman Beto O'Rourke, current Congressman Joaquin Castro of San Antonio, and then State Representative James Tallarico?
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be more folks that join the race. Um, my background in the military is to solve the problem. I was on the space station, we had a really bad ammonia leak alarm. I didn't worry that some of my crewmates were Russians, and I didn't care about their background. We just need to solve the problem. And that's going to be how I approach being the senator from Texas. I'm going to serve Texans, and I'm not going to work for the senator from New York. Um, Colin Allred, again, good man. I voted for him. He is Chuck Schumer's candidate. So if Democrats think that we can run Chuck Schumer's candidate and win in Texas, it's been 30 years. That's not going to happen. And it's really important right now because we have this big, beautiful bill. It's horrific. 1.4 million Texans are going to lose their health insurance. Texas, thanks to our one party GOP rule, we already have the most number of uninsured people of any state, and we're about to add 1.4 million to that roster. That's important to me. I have family members who have used Medicaid recently. It's an important thing. Texans are going to lose that. And unless we can win in the Senate, unless we can get a majority, there is no fighting back. We just sit there and let all of these disasters that are happening, losing healthcare, having masked men run through the streets of Texas, yanking construction workers and farm workers off the street, throwing them in plain cars. That's not American. That's not Texan. And unless we can win as a Democratic Party with a common sense guy like myself, if we try and do the same thing over and over again, we're going to lose again.
So when you say you are a common sense Democrat. What exactly does that mean? And have you been a lifelong Democrat? Have you been a lifelong Texan?
I moved to Texas 25 years ago when I became an astronaut. So as they say, I wasn't born here, but I got here as soon as I could. Love Texas. I've lived in Texas way longer than anywhere else I've lived on Earth or off Earth. So I've lived here for 25 years. So I'm very much a Texan, very much Texas values, fiercely independent. And I think as a common sense Democrat is what I call myself. I'm focused on solving the problem. So we have some big problems: healthcare, education, the economy, getting the debt under control. I'm not just going to be a Democrat and vote 100% for the party line. I won't be getting a Christmas card from Chuck Schumer. I can promise you that. I'm going to vote for Texans first. If there's an energy bill that makes sense for Texas, I'm going to vote for that. But when you vote for a senator, you vote for their values. You vote for who they are as a person. You're not voting for a certain tax rate or some specific policy because you don't. The reality is nobody knows what's going to happen in the next 6 years of my Senate term. So what you're voting for is values, and I'm going to be someone focused on Texans and not on one particular political party.
And where are you on the ideological spectrum?
I hate labels. I'll take issues individually. I think I'm sure that the vast majority of policies that I agree with that I'll support are very common sense. I think I fall with the majority of Texans on most issues, but I hate labels. The whole idea of liberal and conservative has been turned on its side. Today's Republican Party certainly has nothing to do with what really a conservative is. So I think I would go issue by issue on that.
Have you been a lifelong Democrat?
I have not. I was actually an independent for most of my career. I was in the Air Force for over 30 years, so I was very apolitical. I always checked the box, or, when I would register, I was an independent. In the last 10 years, I have not been able to support the GOP because of some of the crazy things that have been happening in the country. But I have not been a lifelong Democrat, no.
And you mentioned the so-called big beautiful bill as far as Medicaid cuts, and I'm just wondering the cuts because I've asked a lot of Republicans and Democrats about this issue, and the Republicans say that Medicaid is still going to grow, but they're cutting the amount that it will grow. And they say that they want to make sure that this program is still, able to sustain itself with as far as pregnant women, as far as the poor and the disabled, and not having able-bodied people being on it without working. So where are you on that issue?
Well, I think the most important thing, this is a massive bill. It's 1,000 pages. This is not how Congress should be doing spending bills. First of all, Congress should do their job. They should do 12, budgets, 12 separate budget bills. They're cramming all this stuff in at the last minute. They're doing it through something called reconciliation, which means that only 51 senators have to approve it. Normally it's 60, which requires there to be some bipartisan work and let's actually govern. So the way that they're doing this is immoral. The results of this, I think, are going to be moral. And I don't think we actually know the specifics. But to your point about Medicaid, like I said, I have family members that depend on Medicaid. 1.4 million Texans are going to lose health insurance. And I don't know if you've been to the doctor recently. I have for several things. It is expensive. Unless you have insurance, it'll bankrupt your family. And there's about half of the Texan families don't have $1,000 to handle $1,000 emergency. So I think the pain that this is going to cause Texans is just immoral. It's not just only wrong as a policy. This is unchristian. This is not Texas values.
And what about tax cuts? That's also part of this reconciliation package.
Yeah. I think never in American history has there been so much wealth transferred and taken from so many people to so few. The benefits that billionaires get from this are immoral. Again, I'm a Christian. This is not Christian. This is a way to help out the billionaires in Manhattan and New York City and in Silicon Valley. And this is not going to help the Roughnecks out in the Permian Basin, or car mechanics in Beaumont. This is a giant transfer of wealth. And I want to talk about the deficit because they're adding trillions of dollars to our deficit, which is already 34 trillion. Here's an analogy. If I gave you $1 a second, it would take 12 days for me to give you $1 million. It would take 33 years for me to give you $1 billion. It would take 33,000 years for me to give you $1 trillion. And this is, 4 trillion added to the deficit. What we're taking from our future generations to allow billionaires to have tax cuts is just immoral on the highest order. And this bill should be stopped. It can't be stopped because we don't have 51 Democrats unless we can get some Republicans to vote, which is why it's so important that I win this Senate race, or this kind of theft of wealth is going to continue.
Do you support any tax cuts for any people, middle class, the working folk?
Absolutely, and of course we need to reduce the tax burden on the middle class and on the working class. The income inequality, everybody knows, has been really growing in America, and especially young people today have just given up on the system. They think it's completely rigged. So we need to build a system that's fair. Of course, people need to pay their taxes. Of course, wealthy people need to pay their taxes. The Trump has been going out of his way to make sure that wealthy people don't have to pay their taxes, and that's something that I'm going to stop when I'm in the Senate.
Couple of more questions. The U.S. bombing of Iran, what did you make of that? Did you agree with it? And how should the U.S. proceed as far as trying to make sure that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon? And do you trust Iran that it will not try to rebuild?
So, a couple thoughts on that. First of all, I'm an Air Force fighter pilot, so just congratulations. The Air Force flew an excellent mission that was very complicated with aircraft from multiple continents. That was a complicated mission. They flew it perfectly, and the weapons apparently work perfectly, so that's good. I think it is actually insane to declare victory in a war after you bomb three targets. Like, wars are a lot more complicated than that, and unfortunately, the regime is still in power. The mullahs are still running Iran. It's an evil regime. They have American blood on their hands. I wish nothing but the worst for those mullahs, but they're still in power. We don't know where the uranium, the highly enriched uranium, is. The reports are that it got taken away. I haven't seen the intelligence, so I can't comment. When the Secretary of Defense says that that was the most complicated military operation in history and it compares it to D-Day, it really shines a spotlight on just how incompetent the Secretary of Defense is, and all the other cabinet members in this administration, which is why we need senators who will not vote to approve these kind of people like Pete Hegseth. So I think that we definitely did some damage to Iran. I don't think this solves the problem once and forever. It probably slowed them down some. I hope we hurt them. I hope this regime comes to an end eventually, but that's not America's job right now. So I'm concerned about the future, but congratulations to the Air Force and Navy on a successful mission for sure.
Do you support regime change?
That has to come from Iran. I saw that George W. Bush speech on the aircraft carrier with mission accomplished. We've tried regime change for the last several decades. My whole Air Force career was focused on this. My 45 combat missions were over Iraq. This is not something that America needs to go do. I hope there is regime change. I hope the Iranian people can do this. These mullahs need to be gone, but this is not America's job right now.
Would you rather run against Senator Cornyn or Attorney General Ken Paxton, and why?
Look, I don't care who the Republicans put up. I'm going to fight, and I'm in this race to win. Um, Ken Paxton is corrupt. We all know this. You've reported on this many times. I mean, he's probably going to win. All the polling that I'm sure you're reporting on is showing I've seen 20 points. He's up by 20 points. I have rep I've talked to Republicans who are donating to my campaign because they hate John Cornyn so much. I've thought about what kind of Democrat I am. And look, I'm an astronaut. We all love John Kennedy, right? This nation commits itself to landing a man on the moon. So I'm a John F. Kennedy Democrat. One of his quotes is, "Beware the man who tries to ride the tiger, for he will find himself in its belly." And that's exactly what John Cornyn has done. He has tried to ride the tiger of Donald Trump. He just posted a picture of himself reading The Art of the Deal. It's the most pathetic picture I've ever seen, that this man in his 70s, he's been in office for 40 years, that he would try and ride that tiger. He's going to end up in the belly. So I think it's going to be Ken Paxton, but I don't care who it is. I'm going to run a hard campaign.
Last question, and that is if you are to be the Democratic nominee, Republicans are going to throw a lot at you. And I'm wondering, how would you respond to them calling you radical left? They're going to question whether you support, because they've criticized other Democrats before for supporting men who are transitioning to women, playing on women's sports. They've criticized Democrats for being for open borders, for anti-Second Amendment, for pro-abortion. How do you
Yeah.
respond to all that?
I'll probably take their negative ads and run them and just make fun of them because they're going to be so ridiculous. So I've got next to my bed, I've got a 357, a beautiful Smith and Wesson. I've got a 9 mil. I'm a fan of the Second Amendment. I think we need common sense gun laws. Like almost all Texans agree with that. I think that biological men should not play in women's sports. I think that one of the biggest problems that Democrats had in 2024 is that we didn't address the illegal immigration. That was like, as a party, Joe Biden, he just did not address it like he should have. Now, the fault is also on Republicans. There was a very tough immigration bill. John Cornyn voted against it because Donald Trump wanted immigration to be a mess. He voted against America. John Cornyn voted against America. He voted against Texas. He voted against a very tough immigration bill so that he could help his master, his idol in Mar-a-Lago. And so I'll take those issues head on. Like I said, I'm a common sense guy. I think I agree with Texans on these types of issues.
What do you make of the state of the border right now?
Well, I think illegal immigration has really dropped off a lot because the word has gotten out, to into Central America. They know not to come here because it's not allowed. So I think the last number I saw is $1 billion. Excuse me, the 82nd Airborne. We're deploying all these military troops. We spent $1 billion and they're just sitting there twiddling their thumbs. I have some Army friends who are commanders in these units, and they were telling me like they're just completely wasting their time. They're getting per diem, so it's good for the privates and the sergeants. They're getting some money to basically do nothing. Donald Trump also just took $1 billion away from the Army to improve barracks for soldiers. So they still have the Marines, the second what is it, the second battalion, 7th Marines deployed in Los Angeles. They're doing nothing at all, wasting taxpayer money. They should be training for combat at their home station, and instead they're just wasting their time doing nothing.
We will leave it there. Colonel Terry Virts, thank you so much. We
Thanks for
appreciate
having
it.
me on.
You bet.